Hello folks, this is Ariel at Nyth. I'm going to try to do a video today about what my house is and how I got it. I have a blog post about this as well if you're interested in more details, but it's something I get a lot of questions about, so I'm going to try to answer some of them. First, if you haven't watched my other videos or followed my posts or seen the photos, this is my house I am in. I live in a tiny house that is on wheels, off-grid in the mountains of northern Wyoming. My house is about 170 square feet if you don't count the sleeping loft. And I have lived here this is my third winter, so about 2.5 years. So I want to give you a little bit of the background about how I ended up here in this house and how I got it. I did not build the house myself. That's probably the most common question. I did help design it, but it was built for me by Tumbleweed Tiny Homes. I've been very happy with the construction and also very happy with their customer service after purchase. If I've ever had an issue come up, they've been amazing to deal with in getting it sorted out. Just a few other things. I'm working on my videoing skills, hence me sitting on the floor, which I do a good bit anyway, because especially when it's chilly outside, I like sitting in front of my fire. But I was finding when I sat on the couch, the camera would pick up the bright white snowbank outside and the video would look kind of dark. So anyway, to resolve that, that's why I'm sitting here. But I do often sit or lay on the floor in front of my fireplace to read books or browse the internet or edit photos or things like that, just because I like that. I'm probably at least a little bit into the functional mobility idea of not using furniture that involves a lot of sitting, because it's not that great for your health if you spend a lot of time doing that. So anyway, this is not a totally untypical thing, but that's why I'm sitting here instead of on the couch. Hopefully it'll improve the quality a tiny bit. Anyhow, back to my house. I did not have a long drawn out process of dreaming about having a tiny house and then many years later finally achieving that goal. I have mentioned before in some of my videos that the reason I went tiny was firstly financial. When I decided to go tiny, it was because of a housing emergency. I had a long-term roommate. She and I had rented a townhome that we really liked for quite a few years. We were planning to stay there, and we found out one day that it was sold. That kind of happened, that we found out was kind of actually a mistake. I'm not sure who was supposed to have told us. We rented it through a rental company. I think they thought the owner told us, the owner thought they had, and the first we found out that the house was being sold was when we got a phone call about whether or not it was okay to show it to a prospective buyer the next day. It was shown, I think, 4 or 5 times in the next week. They had about 4 offers on it the Monday after we found out it was on the market, and it was sold later that week. We did have about 2 months yet on our current lease, so we did have a little time. They did not try to kick us out early to figure out what we were going to do, but that was not a planned part of life. So in those 2 months, I was trying to figure out what to do. First, we started just looking for other rentals in the area together. We like having each other as roommates, so that was our first plan. But in the area where I live, as I've also mentioned before in several videos, the housing market is extremely tight and extremely unaffordable. We had been splitting $1,450 a month rent on our current house, but we'd been there for a while, and we were finding that everything else available for rent, which was not much at all, was significantly more expensive, to the point of being close to 100% of my monthly income to pay for half of any other house we could get. And there just wasn't much. It is no exaggeration that in our paper several times in the past several years we've had 8 or 9 pages of help wanted ads and 3 or 4 places for rent. Not pages, but 3 or 4 individual houses for rent and pages of help wanted ads. So we've got a pretty big imbalance here. So I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do about that. We couldn't find another place we wanted to rent with 2 bedrooms for the 2 of us that we could also afford. and I did not want to leave the area. This place has been home to me for a while, more of a home than where I grew up. I really like it here. I don't know that I'll stay forever, but there's a lot of things. If you've seen some other, photography and stuff, you can probably understand why I like it here and why lots of other people do. So that it was seeming to come down to my choice was go into debt on a monthly basis to rent a home or leave the area, and I didn't want to do either of those things. Don't believe spending more than 100% of your income on housing is generally going to be recommended by any financial planner you find. So I was looking at other options. I enjoy and have spent a lot of time backpacking. I have lived out of my car at various times and for varying lengths of time, and I thought, you know what, I could do that. I could get a van and go to van life full time, figure out somewhere, some friend's driveway to park it or something, and I could live in a van, and that would allow me to stay here. So I started looking at camper van conversions and blogs related to that, and I bumped into the idea of a tiny house. I had seen a picture, maybe a short video clip of one several years before when somebody had shared it on Facebook, and I glanced at it and thought, oh, isn't that cool? And never thought more about it. But I remembered it when somebody on one of those van conversion sites was talking about tiny houses and thought, in this climate where I live, especially with our lengthy and cold winters, if you've seen any of my recent posts, we've got over 440 inches of snow for the winter, and it is snowing outside as we speak, / raining just a little bit. It's kind of warm today. Living in a building that's built like an insulated home would be much more comfortable than living in a van or a camper or an RV. So that was kind of one moment that made me switch from, well, I guess I could live in a van to, I think maybe I want a tiny house. And it only really took a couple days of looking at tiny houses and ideas and plans and pictures to decide, yes, this I'm pretty sure would work for me. So I started looking for a builder to build one. At that time, remember this was 2.5 years ago, there were very, very few builders doing pre-built tiny homes. Most people were doing self-built, which is way cooler. If you build your own house, I think that's pretty amazing. But I didn't have time. I was about to lose the house I was in. It was headed into winter. I had no place to build. I had no current house building skills. I imagine it's something I could have learned, but it would have taken me some time, and I had no place to do it or time to do that or tools or anything. So it made sense for me to find somebody to build it for me. So at that time there was only a tiny handful of builders. Tumbleweed Tiny Homes, though based in California, their plant is in Colorado Springs, which was still about an 8.5-hour drive from here, but the closest tiny home builder by far. They had a showroom model on their lot, so I took a day and a half when I had off work, drove 9 hours one way to sit in a tiny house, actually walk around in one, talk to them. I wanted to be sure this was something that I wasn't going to invest money in, and then the moment it showed up, I would think, oh no, this isn't going to work for me. So I'm glad I did that. I was able to talk to the builders for quite a while, kind of sketch out some of what I thought I wanted and get their feedback on that. So over the next, whatever the remainder was of those 2 months till I lost my current housing, I worked out a design with Tumbleweed. If you're looking at their website, my home is a modified version of the Tumbleweed Cypress Overlook model. Most of my modifications involved greatly expanding the kitchen, which you can halfway see behind me because I cook a lot, and a lot of people don't. So anyway, that was not too hard to work out kind of what I wanted, what would work for them. I would send them a sketch of saying, hey, how about this? And they'd say, well, because of the RV code, Tumbleweed is licensed as an RV manufacturer. We can't put this close to that, so how about this? And we got that all worked out. In the meantime, I was also working on the finances. I've always done jobs I really liked, and most of them have not paid really well. That was worth it to me because I was getting to do something I liked every day. But that meant I did not have enough savings to buy anything sizable at the drop of a hat, much less a pre-built tiny home. So I thought, well, I'm not really interested in going into debt. I've never been in debt. I had no debt. That's probably part of what allowed me to make this move so rapidly. But the trade-off of trying to pay rent in this area and save to be able to buy a tiny house in cash, that just didn't seem realistically possible. So I went and talked to my local bank about an RV loan. This was one of the major reasons I went with Tumbleweed, because they were RV IA certified, which meant that a bank would be more likely to look at doing a loan on one of their tiny houses. To the best of my knowledge, that RVIA certification doesn't necessarily mean a house is any better or worse, but it can help considerably with the financing. So I went and talked to my local bank. They were basically like, we don't really do that. They'd never heard of tiny houses. But even an RV, they're like, yeah, we do 3-year loans, and it's this much a month for that amount, and that wasn't something that would work for my finances either. So having seen various other people talk a little bit about this, I went and found our one local credit union and talked to them about doing a loan. It was something they were open to. The lady who was my loan officer was super helpful and understanding. She had never heard of a tiny house either, had no idea what I was talking about really, and as I explained it though, she was willing to work with me and figure it out and take it back to her board and say, hey, I think this would be something we can do, and so on. Again, I don't think she would have been able to do that had the builder not been certified as a RV manufacturer. But she was willing to work with me, and that allowed me, with only a few $100s in the bank at the time, to, well, I guess in those few weeks I rapidly saved up a few thousand more. So I put a small down payment on it, and I was able to get a 15-year RV loan for a total price on the house from Tumbleweed, which includes it being completed, totally finished, all the appliances in it, and delivered to my location because I didn't have a vehicle big enough to tow it. So it was easier for me to just have them deliver it, since I don't anticipate needing to move it in the near future. That whole total was, I believe, just over $84,000. That is a big number, and I'm sure I'm going to get lots of comments out, that's way too much, you could do it for way less, I did it for way less, so-and-so did it for way less. That is absolutely true. I have other friends who have built their own tiny houses for significantly less. Macy Miller is probably one of the prime ones. She built a fabulous tiny home for, I think, about $12,000 total. She also spent a ton of time doing the work herself, which, as I said, I didn't have the time to do. She's also an architect, so she had more experience with house building than I did. And she spent, I think she would say, at least hundreds, maybe thousands of hours spending time collecting free, used, extra goods and materials to build her house out of. I didn't have the time or the place to do any of that. And you might also say that for $84,000, I could buy a tiny house, or a small house, or even possibly a big house attached to a piece of ground somewhere, and that would be much better, because all I currently own is a house that's on wheels and I don't own any ground. That is also possibly true. But for me, I wanted to stay in this area where prices per acre of bare dirt are anywhere from $500,000 to $1.2 million for very tiny lots, and I could not afford dirt here. You cannot buy anything here for $84,000 that you can live in, and I don't want to live in some of the places where housing is cheaper. If you want to, I've got nothing against that, but a lot of the places with very inexpensive housing are, for obvious reasons, not necessarily the most desirable places to live. So that trade-off for me was totally worth it. Not saying that it would be for anybody else necessarily, but for me it was. I think all in, by the time I count the vehicle taxes I paid to our local DMV, by the time I count a few of the furniture things I bought, like a mattress and this little table right here, you can only put so much furniture in a tiny house, some propane bottles, my solar system, which I have another video about if you're interested in that, the panels, the generator, the batteries, all of that stuff. I count the wood stove, which I added later. You can probably hear it crackling and see the flames here. By the time I paid for all of that, I count my total tiny house cost at being just about exactly $90,000. Again, that is a pretty big amount. but for the reasons I just explained, it is worth it for me. So back to the loan. I got a RV loan for 15 years at 4.75% interest. I didn't have a great credit history, not because I had bad credit, I just had no credit at all. And banks seem to assume that by the time you're in your mid to late 20s, you're going to have bought lots of things on credit, and therefore having no credit history is not a good thing. I had never bought anything on credit. I've paid cash for old vehicles. Every time I bought a vehicle, I have no student loans. I've never had a credit card. I do now, actually, for some other reasons, but at the time I did not. And so I just had zero credit. So if you had really great credit, you could probably have gotten a slightly lower interest rate. Also, due to my lack of credit at all, the bank wanted, or the credit union wanted somebody with credit history, and my sister, who has gone to school, had school loans, bought new vehicles, and done a little bit more of the normal American life, has credit history. And she was willing to co-sign. Her name was on there for a little while. It is now off of the loan because I've paid it down enough and paid it back enough that it is back to just me being alone. But I am very thankful for her being willing to lend her credit history to helping me do that initially. So I have a loan payment that is, I believe, $576 a month. If you remember that I just said I was previously splitting a $1,450 rent on a place, you can tell that that's lower than what I was paying. And I was paying the bigger half of the rent on that last home for various reasons, mostly that I used the house more and had more guests in it. But that works for me, on a monthly basis versus paying $1,200, $1,500, $1,800 per bedroom to rent a place in this area, which is what the price range seems to be right now. And it allows me enough flexibility in my finances because the economy here is very seasonal, depends on the weather, depends on tourism. So I have some months where my income is significantly more and some months where it's significantly less. Even on the significantly less months, it's a payment that I can easily handle, and on the significantly more months, I can pay a lot extra to the principal, which I have done. My total is currently paid down to about $32,000 from my total that I count of $90,000. So I'm about 2/3 paid off, and I'm about 2.5 years in. I am hoping, right now I'm going through the less income months of the year, so I'm hoping that at least by the end of next year, that loan will be completely gone, and I will have it paid off in about 3 years total. That is my goal, barring some major injury or something that seems like it would be feasible. That will also save me about $20,000 that I would have otherwise paid in interest had I just paid the set monthly amount every single month for a full 15 years. I'm still going to end up paying several thousand in interest, and I don't generally like loans or debt or interest, but for me, because of the impossibility of paying the exorbitant rent here and saving to have cash to buy it in cash outright, I think that trade-off of paying the credit union some interest has been totally worth it for me because it's allowed me to do this. When this house is paid off, my monthly expenses go to being very, very, very low. People ask about utilities. I might do a whole post on that. I do buy some propane. I've got a propane heater in addition to the wood stove. I buy some gas for my generator. I do have a wireless internet connection that is cellular based with a local company. That bill is fairly small. I have an old flip phone, so that bill is fairly small, but those would be kind of my other set utility expenses. But if I have no house payment and that loan is paid off, I also don't have lot rent. I trade some work to the owners in exchange for being able to park here, but that doesn't involve cash, so my actual cash monthly expenses will be extremely low, which gives me a lot of freedom to do whatever else, which is pretty exciting. So at the moment I am kind of working extra much to be able to pay extra much down on the loan so it can go away as fast as possible, because the faster it goes away, the less interest I pay and the more money I save. So this is something I was able to do pretty quickly. Back to the timeline, I found out we were going to lose our house that we were in. We had about 2 months time frame, and my former roommate, she did find a house that she's sharing with several other young ladies as well, so she's not homeless on the street either. But we had about 2 months till we had to be out. I was able to finalize the house design, the paperwork with the bank, and all of that in less than 2 months, but I didn't have the house right away because Tumbleweed had a waiting list at the time of people who had orders in first. So I actually rented a little motel room for 2 months and moved all of my stuff into there, set the bed in the motel room up on concrete blocks, packed all of my belongings under it because I didn't want to pay for storage somewhere else, lived there for 2 months, and then moved into here. Once, most of that 2 months waiting time was simply being on the waiting list and having them manufacturing other people's homes. Once they started building this house, I think they were sending me photos that it took about 6 days to go from an empty flatbed trailer to a completed house ready to move into that was delivered to me, which is pretty amazing. That is certainly not something I could have done had I built my own. But again, if I could say, hey, I built this by myself, I do think that is a lot cooler. So, that was the trade-off. But for me, it's so far been working out to be a really good decision. Financially and freedom-wise, buying a tiny house is probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. I have no regrets at all about that. I guess I won't get into what some of the lifestyle aspects here because that's kind of a separate post. I'm going to try to stick with more of the financial things. But it's realizing that my housing is going to be paid off is pretty exciting because I've now realized I could retire when that's done. I will probably keep working for a while longer because I'd kind of like to save up money to actually buy my own property where I could park it on my own property, or even build a small house attached to the ground on my own property. But that's at some point in the future. And by retire, I mean that I would be able to stop doing jobs I don't particularly enjoy at times when I don't particularly like to do them for people I do not particularly love to work for. It would not mean sitting around with my feet propped up the rest of my life. My idea of retirement would be having a place where I could do more of this off-grid lifestyle, have a big permanent garden, plant a substantial orchard, raise chickens, maybe a goat, try to be as self-sufficient as possible, which does involve a lot of hard work. I'm very aware of that, having lived off-grid like this for several years. But that would be my idea of retirement, and it would be exciting to be able to afford to just do that without having to have a full-time or steady job away from home that I needed for an income. So that's one of the exciting things financially. I have also made some choices, I guess, in the past, long before thinking about tiny houses, and they have continued that have also financially allowed me to be able to more easily do this. Like I said, I had no savings, but I also had no debt for anything. That would have greatly hampered my efforts to just instantly decide tomorrow to buy a tiny house. I also have never been a big spender. Like I said, I've had jobs that I really enjoyed, but they were not particularly high paying. So I never have spent a ton of money. I've made other trade-offs that were worth it to me for the freedom to be able to live where I wanted and do what I wanted. I drive an old vehicle. It's 18 years old. It has 220,000 miles on it. I love it. It gets me around great. I've got an all-wheel drive Astro van, but it is far from new. I have an old flip phone. Because I have a laptop and when I really need to get online I can do that. And every now and then a smartphone would be more convenient. But for the most part, I think I'd waste time on it, and it would cost me an awful lot more than the $12.99 a month I spend to have all the texting and phone calls I need from my phone. Just little things like that can add up, and they've, having had that kind of lifestyle before, I think made the switch to tiny and allowed the finances of going tiny to work out really well for me. So if that's something you want to do, you might want to think about some of those things, or if those things that would work for you or that you would be okay with. But that is something that, did help me with this process. I kind of like Thoreau's quote that, the man is richest whose pleasures are cheapest. and in general, as long as you've got a spot of dirt to do it, things like gardening, photography, reading books, walking around in the woods, those are not expensive hobbies. Photography can be when you buy the camera, but if you use it for enough years, then it doesn't become too expensive. So yeah, that's how I got the tiny house. That's a little bit of the financial details of how I made it work and what's going on right now. I try to be really straightforward about all those details because I hope that they can help somebody else with making their decisions, or, you know, giving them ideas for what's possible or what they do or do not want to do. Like I said, I've got a blog post. I'll link in the info on this video to that. That's got even more details on all my finances. I'll probably also link to the one on my tiny house insurance. I do have an insurance policy on this place as an RV that is lived in full-time. Anyway, that's a long story, but I have a post about that. I have to have that because I still have a loan on this place. So I'll link to that as well. And if you guys have any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them. Check out my blog, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll talk to you next time.